Hi everyone, and welcome to the Fragrant Leaves virtual tea tasting. Today we'll be exploring the White Peony white tea from China. Now if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comment section and I'll answer them at the end of our tasting session today. So white teas, they're a specialty of Fujian, China, and this is a coastal southern province which is very well known for producing all kinds of teas, but particularly white teas. Now why are white teas named white teas? Well, the name came from the silver downy hairs that cover the early spring buds of the tea leaf or the tea plant before they're picked. So it's a very special characteristic of the white tea. There are two main types of white tea. It really depends on the picking standard when they're picked during the season. The highest grade is known as the silver needle, and this is a single bud tea, so it's the early new leaves that have not been opened. And here's an example of the silver needle. You can see, let me see if I can get a nice bud. It's a single bud, so it's that unopened leaf, and it's made entirely of those buds. So it's the highest grade, and maybe we'll do a tea tasting on that at a later time. The second grade is known as White Peony, and that's the tea that we'll be tasting today. And that's a blend of buds and two leaves. So it's a mix of buds and leaves. You'll see this is an example of our White Peony that we'll be tasting today. You can see it's a very large leaf tea with a sprinkling of some silver buds. And there are other grades of white tea that are below the White Peony, but they're not generally sold much out of China. There's gongmei and shoumei, which are known as the eyebrow teas, but we really won't go into much detail on those today. So how are white teas processed? The processing of white tea is it's a very simple processing method. It's probably the most natural for all of the types of teas that are produced. When I say simple, though, that doesn't mean that it doesn't take a lot of skill. The key characteristic for white tea is a controlled and prolonged drying process. This is known as wilting. After the leaves are picked, they're placed on racks, and then they are generally air dried. And this usually takes place indoors in a special room with control for airflow, for temperature and humidity. If the sun is shining and it's nice and bright, the tea will also be dried outdoors in what's known as solar withering. This process reduces the moisture in the leaves, and it's a process that takes place over a period of 1 to 2 days, so it's a very slow, controlled drying process. And it does take a lot of skill because the tea maker has to adjust for humidity and temperature. It's a lot easier to do this indoors than it is under the sun where there's not as much control. During this wilting process, because it occurs over a number of days, the tea will very slowly and gently oxidize. So white teas do have a very slight oxidation, anywhere from 8 to 15%. After the leaves are dried, then the final step is a very low temperature baking or charcoal roasting to seal in the flavor and the aroma. So this is a very easy process, very simple process. There's no rolling and shaking or shaping of the leaves as there might be with the other types of tea, such as green or oolong teas. So this classic white tea crafting method, what it results in is a thicker body for the tea, as well as it imparts a light sweetness to the tea. Now before we brew our tea today, let me just talk a little bit about the two main producing areas in China. So the two main areas in Fujian that are well known for producing high quality white tea, the first is the Fuding area. This is an area in Fujian that's closer to the ocean. The elevation is about 600 meters, that's about 2,000 feet. And the tea plants in this area mature earlier, usually in March, before the rainy season, so they're actually, many times they will be withered or dried in the sun outdoors. This type of Fuding type of white tea tends to have a very refreshing, very bright flavor. The second main area of production for the white tea is an area called Zhenghe, This is a mountainous area, and the elevation is slightly higher in this area, about 800 meters, or about close to 2,700 feet. The tea plants here, because it's colder, generally will mature a little bit later in the season, and because there's less sun, they generally tend to be dried and withered indoors. The taste of the Zhenghe tea tends to have a thicker body and tends to be slightly sweeter than the Fuding teas. The tea that we'll be tasting today is a Zhenghe variety of White Peony. So let's go ahead and start to brew a cup of our White Peony. We're going to be using the Gongfu method, which we've used in some of our previous tea tasting sessions. We'll be able to, using this method, we'll be able to steep the teas multiple times using a larger amount of leaf and a less amount of water. So we're going to be using our gaiwan, which is our ceramic covered cup, our sharing pitcher, and our 2 tasting teacups today. Okay. So the first step, again, is we're going to be heating up our teaware. And this is just to make sure that when we brew the tea, the temperature of our brewing temperature doesn't drop too much and make it too cold. So white teas generally benefit from a hotter brewing temperature. They're not as sensitive as green teas. In fact, they're very forgiving. So you can use a temperature of anywhere between 180 degrees and 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and you'll get a wonderful brew. The amount of tea that I'm going to be using today, this is about 2 to 3 tablespoons of the White Peony. You'll notice how much volume there is in the leaf. It's a very fluffy tea, so I recommend using more tea or more leaves. And we're basically going to fill this gaiwan completely with the leaves. And our gaiwan, it holds about 5 ounces. So as you can see, I've pretty much filled the gaiwan with the White Peony. Now we're going to start with a brief rinsing of the leaves. I'm just going to cover the leaves very briefly with some water. We'll go ahead and pour that out. So our first rinse we don't generally drink or serve to guests. Although if you want to try it to compare it to later steepings, you certainly can do that. So now we'll start our first brew. Just fill that up to the top. And because we've used quite a bit of leaf in the gaiwan, the first steeping can go anywhere from 5 to 30 seconds. You can literally pour the water in, pour it out, and drink it. We'll let this tea go for just about 30 seconds to give it a little more robust flavor. And the nice thing about the white tea, as I mentioned, it's a very forgiving tea. So even if you go ahead and brew it 5 or 10 minutes, it will never get bitter. It's one of those very easy to drink teas. If you use less leaf in your gaiwan or in your teapot, I would recommend just increasing the time that you brew. So again, if you set it and you forget to come back and drink it, 5-10 minutes later, it'll still be very tasty. I like to smell the lid of the gaiwan. Just gives a nice introduction to the tea. So you can see the color of our tea. It's a nice yellow gold color, very bright. We'll go ahead start by sniffing the aroma. So because the white tea, this white peony, it's a very naturally processed tea, I would say that the smell of the leaves, the smell of the tea is very close to the original smell of the tea plant. And this is known as kind of the white hairs or the baihao aroma. So it's very typical for white teas to have that very herbaceous, very close to the original smell of tea leaves of the tea plant. It's a mellow aroma. I'm getting a little bit of floral notes, very light floral, and some cut hay. Let's go ahead and taste it. Okay, so the first steep, it's a very full-bodied tea. I'm getting a light sweetness. Again, this is from the Zhenghe style of white peony. There's a bit of a melony fruitiness to it. There's also, going back to the aroma, a little bit of a honey note as well. It's got that sort of sweet honey aroma to it, almost like a honey mead. So we'll go ahead and just brew up a second steeping of our tea. And I'm just going to go ahead and literally not let it steep very long, just pour it right out into the pitcher. Smell the lid. It's getting a little stronger aroma there. You can see the color is deepening a little bit to a sort of golden yellow. Go ahead and taste that one. So I'm getting, it's a very warm tasting tea. The aroma, the combination of the aroma and the taste, very warm, very soothing. Getting some notes of the cut hay, a little bit of a malty tone to it as well. And definitely a sweetness in the aftertaste. So with this style of brewing, again, using a large amount of leaves, the white peony and pretty much any white tea, you could probably brew this, 8 to 10 times, and you'll get a different nuance of flavor and aroma with each steep. This is also a really nice tea, I think, for the summer to enjoy. I know here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, we have very, very dry weather, and white teas are considered particularly cooling. They're very, very good for hydration if you have a dry climate. But they're also just very good in the summer because they are cooling as far as the traditional Chinese medicine. The tea also pairs really well with food. So if you're looking for a tea to drink with a meal, this is a wonderful tea. It pairs really well with cakes, I find, with bread, almost any food. It's a really nice tea. So I think we'll stop there. We can certainly brew many more steeps, but I think it'll give you a little overview of the white peony. And I'm going to go ahead and open it up to see if we have any questions online. Do we have any questions?
We have a couple of email questions.
Okay, I think we have some questions that came in via email earlier, so I'll go ahead and address those. Thank you. Okay, so the first question is, are there other countries making white tea besides China? Yes, there are. India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, all three of these countries are producing white teas. And they all have very different characteristics. I will say that the traditional terroir, so to speak, for white tea is China, is that Fujian province in the southern coastal region. And what makes the Chinese white tea very special is the specific type of tea varietal that grows in that area. Normally the varietal that's grown, there's several different varietals, but the main ones are known as the Dabai, which is the big white, and the Dahao, which is known as the big tip. So those are very specific varietals that will have different aroma and flavor characteristics. So the varietals that are grown outside of China, in India or Sri Lanka or Nepal, they may use different varietals. So the taste will be different. The processing method may be very similar, but the ultimate taste will be different. But because white tea has been growing in popularity over recent years, many countries are adapting and producing more white teas. And our second question is, what is the difference between green tea and white tea? So I would say the main difference has to do with the processing. As I mentioned in our green tea Dragon Well brewing session, green teas, once they're picked, the oxidation needs to be stopped very quickly, and that usually requires some application of very high heat, whether it's baking or roasting or steaming, to stop that oxidation and preserve all of the green color, the green qualities of the leaf. With the white tea, there is no high heat applied to the white tea processing. It's all done with very low temperatures and over a period of many days. So the tea does oxidize very slightly. That would be the main difference. Green tea, not oxidized; white tea, slightly oxidized and produced with very low temperature. So I think that's all we have for today. I thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you've enjoyed these tea tasting videos. If you like the video, give it a like on Facebook, and if you're interested in learning more about tea, please visit us at our website, which is thefragrantleaf.com. Look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.